scriptures are indeed written for our examples, and we can use it as a mirror. That is why character study is one of the ways in which you can look at the scriptures and learn more about God and see how you can improve in your walk with God, or how we can improve in our walk with God. And we can see. So in this video, we're going to be looking at a man called Naaman, and we find a story in the book of Kings chapter 5, 2 Kings chapter 5. And while looking at that, we would be trying to interrogate ourselves, or looking at things like, what do we know about him? Are there any character traits that were mentioned in the scriptures? Was there any particular problem or situation that he found himself? A challenge? What step did he take to get out of that situation? And how we treated people, because very many times the way we treat people or the way we speak to people can be a reflection of who we are. And as we're doing this, we'll be learning more about him, and also looking at, because the Bible says that these things were written for our examples. And so through those things that we'll be looking at, we can see, would we handle things in the same way, and sincerely look at it and say, if this will be our disposition as well, and if not, then what's our God's expectation? And by the time we're doing that, we would have learned a lot more about not only the scriptures, we also would have learned about ourselves. And I know that this way we will be able to develop in our relationship with God. So that's what we're doing. So I've got my Bible on the screen on my computer here, so I'm going to be reading from there. So the first verse of 2 Kings chapter 5 says, "Now Naaman, the captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and honourable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper." Now I've highlighted 3 words there. The first is that he's a great man, and he says with his master. And later it also said that he's a honourable man. And we're told the reason why he's honourable, because it says there that the Lord had given him victory, deliverance over in some wars that Syria had fought. So of course, because he was a military man, he would be honored, he would be highly esteemed, because his army is being successful. And so I think that is what that honourable means there. And then when it comes to the later part, it says that, but he was a leper, so he had a challenge, a health challenge. And reading through this, we'll be able to see how this man, used his position, and how did he overcome the challenge that he had as a leper, the health challenge. And we can learn from these things. So in verse 2, it says that, and the Syrian had gone out by companies, and they have brought captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. Now, certainly because he was the big man, it meant that in his household he had people, like servants and maybe slaves in that time that were working for him. So in this case, he got a little girl from Israel that was attending to his wife. And we'll see how that information becomes useful to us later. So verse 3 says, "And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover of his leprosy." So this young maid, or this young girl, would have noticed, because he's in the same household, and she would have noticed that the man of the house is a leper. And possibly out of concern, she mentioned to the people, I'm guessing to her mistress, that if only this man could go to Samaria, which is the northern part of Israel, so not Judah, the southern country, that's where the prophet Elisha lived. So she was suggesting that if only this man could go to Israel and meet with this prophet, that he will be healed. I don't think she expressly told the lady of the house the name of the prophet Elisha, but I think it's implied, because Elisha was a very popular prophet. So people in Samaria knew about him. So this lady was concerned, and so she suggested to her mistress. So in verse 4, we see that the man went to the king and said, "Thus says the maid that is of the land of Israel," told the king what the lady said, what the maid said. And this made the king of Syria to say, "Go, I'll send a letter unto the king of Israel." And he sent with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 change of raiment. Now, my point here, the point about this man here is that his wife would have told him what the maid said, and he took it on. Now, that already tells me two things. Number one, of course, he wants a solution to his situation, and that he listens to people, because he could have easily dismissed that information. One, because it's coming from a low person, it's coming from the maid, and number two, it's coming from the maid came from Israel that was under them at that point in time. At least they had the upper hand. So Naaman would not have had any kind, possibly somebody else would not have had any kind of respect from any information or any goodness that is coming from Israel, but he took it on. And that suggests something to me about him, that he wants help and also that he listens. And that brings out his character. So if it was you or myself, if we are in a situation and somebody that we probably would have considered not as exposed at us or doesn't know as much as we do, are we going to take it on? Are we going to take on the advice? That's a question for me to answer, and it's also for you to answer as well. So in verse 9, we saw that he's already arrived in Israel and he's been directed to Elisha. So in verse 9, it says, So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and he stood at the door of the house of Elisha. Verse 10 says, And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and the flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. Now see what happened next. In verse 11 it says, But Naaman was wroth, and went away and said, Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me, and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. So we see him behaving like a superior here, and he was angry that the prophet did not come out to him, at least to pay courtesy to him, because whatever you may, where it doesn't matter how you want to put it, he would have been in Elisha's house. He was there, it says, and he would have seen where he lives. So it's probably not going to be as grandeur as his house in Syria, and through that he can size Elisha up, and he's now saying that this low man is not even coming to pay courtesy to him. So he was angry. I think proud there. So because of this, he then said in verse 12, Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? You see, this is what I was saying earlier, that because they are more successful in that period of time than Israel, because they were dominating, so to say, Israel. So they think everything they've got is better than Israel's one. So that would have been his thought. But now this is coming out. And then he says, May I not wash in them? So he's saying, would he not have washed in the rivers in his own city or his own country and be clean? So he turned and went in a rage. So he was angry. Okay? Because number one, he felt slighted. And he's now comparing, because that anger is coming, and he's now comparing Israel to Damascus. And that made him to decide to go away. Now, what happened next in verse 13 and 14 again brings out another aspect of his character. So I will read that. In verse 13 it says, And his servant came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee to do some great things, would thou not have done it? How much rather then when he said to thee, Wash and be clean? This statement made by the servant also brought something out to me, because number one, I'm thinking that he would have thought, actually he said it, the Naaman said it, maybe I didn't pay attention to it, that he was expecting some dramatic display, and the prophet only said, Go to that river and wash. So he was angry about the river, he was angry at the simplicity of what the prophet asked him to do. But the good thing here about this man is that he was approachable, because if he was not approachable, his servant would not have come to him to say, if the prophet had asked you to do something more dramatic, would you not have done it? That is almost as if the servant was speaking freely unto him. So we see that this man is approachable. And if you and I are in that situation, in that status, would we be as approachable as this man is? Don't forget that he's come all the way from his country because he took advice from a low level maid. And here he's listening again to a servant. So this speaks something, tells us something about his character. So in verse 14 it says, and he went down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. So he piped down and decided to follow what the man of God said, and we see the result. He got his healing. So he humbled himself. He was reasonable. He reasoned with the servant and was able to get results for what he came from all the way from his country in Syria. The scriptures are indeed written for our examples, and we can use it as a mirror. That is why character study is one of the ways in which you can look at the scriptures and learn more about God and see how you can improve in your walk with God, or how we can improve in our walk with God. And we can see in this case, this man, even though he flared up at one point, but he changed his mind and reasoned with the people around him, and he got his healing. So in verse 15, we see that he came to the man of God, that is to Elisha, and with his company, and came and stood before him and said, behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. So this man totally calmed down and he acknowledged God. Somebody else may still be skeptical, but it doesn't sound like a skeptical man here, because much later we see him asking from Eliza that he would have to go and support his master in verse 18, 17 and 18. He would have to support his master when he goes back to Syria, when they go to worship their God. And he was concerned that he doesn't want to bow down to the God of the gods they worship in Syria anymore. And this is suggesting to me that he actually not only just acknowledged God, but he accepted Yahweh as the God, because he said it, no God in all the earth, and he proved it by his conversation with Elisha after. So all of these things, all of this interaction and the things we've read about him, not only bring out his character, but it also tells us how he responded to people, how he reacted to situation, and the fact that he's somebody that is reasonable. And all of this we can learn from it and help us as well to put ourselves in that situation. Are we going to behave the way this man's behaved, having gone through all these steps? So I hope this video has been beneficial to you. If so, please give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. Please turn on your notification button so you can receive an alert when a new video is being released. And until next time, I say unto you, search your scriptures for those nuggets, and God bless.